Who is Edna Young? Did you hear me? Do I need to repeat what I just asked? Who owns the name Edna Young? Not Shamika Young, Relisha's mother, Shamika Young, not her, not Shamika Young, no. And not even Relisha's grandmother. No. I believe Shamika Young is in fact Relisha's mother, as Melissa Young is Relisha's grandmother. So who is in fact Edna Young? This in fact has to be questioned. Yes, it does. Edna Young, who is she and where is she? And where does she fit in this story? Like, subscribe, and the Discovery Channel. The link is provided below. Yes, Discovery Channel. The link is provided below. But once again, who is Edna Young? Who is she? I want to find out. I need somebody to answer me back in the comment section. Yes, somebody answer me back on even this question. Who is that woman? Edna Young. She's in fact somebody, and yet she's somewhere unseen, where even we, yes, the public is not seeing her pertaining to this Relisha Rudd case. Who is Edna Young? I could be right or wrong pertaining to, say, the woman's identity, as in the last name. But when I read in the Washington Post, when look, listen to me. When Relisha came up missing, right? When she went missing, there was in fact a male individual by the name of Gerald Wills that was interviewed. Yes, he was. Gerald Wills was in fact interviewed. The Washington Post. Did anybody miss that? Let me turn this camera around for a second. Let me turn all the way around because the lighting on this is completely messing up in the abstraction. And yet I don't want to stop because I need to know who Edna Young is. Let me ask this. Could Edna Young be a member of the Young family? Could that woman be of any relation to Relisha Rudd herself? That's why I'm right here on camera asking that sort of thing. The question itself. Let me pause for a second. Pause and listen to me on this. There's in fact a Gerald Wills that was once upon a time involved. Yes, Gerald Wills was in fact involved with a woman named Andrea Tatum. And that woman, Andrea Tatum, was in fact married once upon a time with Khalil Tatum, the supposed abductor that took a young Relisha Rudd, right? So if Gerald Wills was involved with the Andrea Tatum, who was also involved with a Khalil Tatum, and yet Khalil murdered Andrea Tatum for whatever reason, no one knows. See, that's the mystery aspect. And yet Gerald Wills, as well as Edna Young, has to in fact play a part as in missing pieces and missing links and mystery. To point out, yes, the point out of abstraction in which I did is to say, as in the signs and what's telling. And yet nobody else is. I don't see anywhere on camera asking these sort of questions in which I do. And yet, once again, do I need to go back so that you, the viewer, are not confused? Gerald Wills was once, in fact, involved with Andrea Tatum. Love. Yes, love. He was actually considered Andrea Tatum's other husband, despite him not being married, and yet he wanted to be married before Khalil had married her. Khalil Tatum, the man that supposedly abducted Relisha, and now Relisha is gone and nowhere to be found, right? Andrea Tatum was with both of these men at the same time. That is in fact a issue. I'm saying that sort of thing can cause problems. But depending on the relationship, such as a love triangle or whatever, that sort of thing, it all depends on how the situation went down. But we still have to question who is Edna Young. Because it was stated in the Washington Post, unless they got something wrong. And no, I'm not feeling trippy pertaining to that, as in the questioning of who is Edna Young, because in the Washington Post is where it was stated Edna Young is supposedly Gerald Wills' mother. The woman that was both Andrea Tatum, who was both involved in Khalil Tatum, in which Relisha was around and came up missing, right? And Andrea Tatum, who was also involved with a Gerald Wills. Yes, Gerald Wills. His mother is supposedly named Edna Young. But on top of that, not only is that woman named Edna Young having the last name of Young, so does Relisha Rudd's mother, Shamika Young. How does that what is that? That is so telling. If the Washington Post didn't get that sort of thing messed up, such as an information, and it's in fact the truth, then that right there can be a clue. Because see, listen to me when I say this sort of thing. Because I have it on paper, so I know just what I'm talking about. See the little Band-Aid right there? I put the Band-Aid, it's a child's Band-Aid, just so I wouldn't forget. Yes, to speak on Relisha herself today, I actually put a child's Band-Aid. I got nieces and all that. So I just put one out of the cabinet to put one there so I don't forget to speak on this child, because something about that does not add up. So, okay, wait a minute. So, Edna Young, she's a Young, and Relisha Rudd's mother is a Young, as well as Relisha Rudd's grandmother is a Young. But Edna, the woman named Edna Young, her son is Gerald Wills, who was in fact involved with Andrea Tatum, who was murdered by Khalil Tatum. Right? The reason why I'm asking this, I have to ask this because that man has to know much more than he's putting on, as in a false fake front or something, to even the Washington Post, Gerald Wills. Because he did come out his mouth and say that he was in fact involved with Andrea Tatum, the woman that Khalil Tatum had killed in that hotel room at the Red Roof Inn. Gerald Wills came out in an interview and said he was in fact the woman's other husband. But that name Young, for Gerald Wills not to carry the name Young, and yet he considered Edna Young his mother, that's to say that woman carries the same last name as Relisha's mom, as well as Relisha's grandmother. Why is that? Am I the only one on video, on camera, and camcorder asking this sort of question? Because this don't seem right. How are you, a man, being a woman's other husband who has gotten killed by Khalil, but your mother not only carries the last name, same last name Young as Relisha's mother, but the woman carries the same last name Young as Relisha's grandmother as well? Why is that? That in fact had to be documented, as in placed down in my notes, because the scientific evidence shows, if that's truth, that Gerald Wills or whoever he is has to be somewhat blood relatives to Shamika Young and Relisha's grandmother, Melissa Young. Is DNA there? I'm saying pertaining to these individuals being relatives or something. I need to know if somebody messed something up somewhere, and it's not me. Because see, I go over all information to verify and make sure I got these notes that I documented, make sure all is right pertaining to what I looked up and researched. That's almost a scientific match, is what I'm trying to say, as in a clue. If Gerald Wills' mother, Edna Young, is related to Relisha's mother, Shamika Young, and Relisha's grandmother, Melissa Young. If that's the truth, then them individuals are in fact blood cousins or something. Shamika Young, the child's mother, and this Gerald Wills, who isn't hardly saying too much of nothing despite all this mishap and drama. It's like he done came out and did an interview and then walked away and took cover or something. That don't seem right. That does not seem right at all. Let me tell you. That coming out of my mouth right now, that doesn't seem right, and yet it does, because something is off about that. Because even if you, the viewer, was to listen to me and make a family tree out of what I just said, you would even be able to see that for yourself. Put Edna Young at the top in the bubble circle. Put Gerald Wills up under in the circle as her son, as he stated in the Washington Post. Right? And then you connect him to Andrea, the wife of Khalil that was murdered by Khalil. As them being lovers. And then not only that just goes along with all the mess of the mother of Relisha and the grandmother. Why do these people have the same last name? Why is that? So let me go back. Let me see right quick, because I might be jumping ahead. Thanks to the individual that called me out and said that I need to try to sort through some puzzle pieces of Relisha's disappearance. Yes, you in the comment section. I'm so glad I did, because that's not right. That's the young aspect. Because see, look, if this man Gerald Wills was involved with Andrea as Andrea's other husband, as she was involved with Khalil, I said that could pose problems. But I'm going to make another video about that. I'm going to make a more abstract video, because I got notes after notes after notes, compiled even about Relisha Rudd herself, pertaining to what could have happened. And even with this man, because see, a man can't just, by the name of Gerald, just can't interview and then walk away and then think that's the end of that. That's not the end of that. Because to say that you were a man sleeping in bed and having sex with a grown woman that was also married to another woman, and that little girl could possibly have either been trafficked, as Gerald stated, the little girl Relisha could have been trafficked by Khalil himself, or that could be Khalil's daughter, the child. That's to say Gerald, in fact, has to know more information. See what I'm going with this? That man has to, because he slept with the woman that ended up being killed. Yes. And not only that, what was the reason and the purpose of Khalil Tatum, the one Relisha was seen around all the time? What was the point of him even divorcing Andrea Tatum, his wife, the month before or so before he killed her? Outside of Relisha, there's more to that. Because there has to be more to that, because see, that man, Gerald Wills, was involved with Andrea while Khalil was in jail. While Khalil was locked up in jail multiple times, Gerald himself was in fact possibly in bed sleeping and having sex with that woman. And more than likely, or possibly so, Khalil had to know that sort of thing, because Gerald stated himself that he was in fact catering and taking care of Andrea while Khalil was going away in jail. So did Khalil know, or did he not know of that sort of thing? I'm thinking he would. And I'm thinking these men had street activity, because not only did Andrea have a jail record and was prone to be a drug addict, Andrea, the woman that Khalil killed, his ex-wife after he divorced her the month or so before he killed her, not only did she have a drug addiction as well as a drug record, but Gerald himself had a history of using drugs and having drug addiction issues as well as Khalil Tatum, the man individual in which Relisha was around. And now it's questionable if that was Relisha's father, the child's father. Could it have been, or could it have not been Khalil, the child's father? But Gerald, in fact, has to know much more. Because to be sleeping with a man's woman, as in having full-blown sex, buying her things and everything else that Andrea Tatum, Gerald Wills doing this sort of thing while Khalil was in jail, is to say, what else does that man know? And not only that, when you add Edna Young to the equation and that being his mother, not only that, now you set that on top where Edna Young could in fact be Gerald Wills' mother, and now that mother has the same last name as Shamika Young and Melissa Young, the child Relisha Rudd's mother and grandmother. So that's to say that man in fact knows more and he's not saying anything. See how I just tied that sort of thing together? Some people can't do that. Yet it takes brains. Yes, it does to scientifically tie something together where, say, news reporters didn't come out here and tell that sort of thing. They're not going to do that. They leave that to you, the viewer, to decide, which is why they don't fill in gaps. But I'm standing right here to fill in some gaps where even that don't make sense. Where is Gerald today, and why ain't he speaking more of knowing? Because see, if a woman, listen to me when I say this, if a man was supposed to marry, if Gerald Wills, his mother's Edna Young, that got the same last name as all Shamika family over there, if that sort of man was supposed to marry Andrea way years before Khalil did, and yet he stays with that woman while Khalil is in jail, it's to say they had to have known each other for a long time, possibly even before Khalil and Andrea had met Gerald. I'm saying, yes, Gerald must have been friends or something with Andrea long before she met Khalil Tatum or something. For him to be involved with a woman, was supposed to marry her, but she in fact pawned a wedding ring for drugs. That's how desperate she got for drugs, right? Andrea Tatum. She pawned a wedding ring that he gave her for some drugs. And he stated out his mouth in the Washington Post that he wasn't mad at her for that sort of thing. He forgave her over pawning the ring he gave her. So that man was in fact supposed to marry Andrea before she went off and married Khalil. But she didn't go too far because she was still involved with both of them men, not sexually, but love-wise as well. As in them both catering and taking care of her. See what I'm saying? So, with me saying that sort of thing, you question even Andrea's history. The woman that was killed by the hands of her husband, who became her ex-husband by divorce the month before he killed her. Why did he kill her? Outside of sex trafficking questions. That's why you would in fact have to question, what did Andrea's identity point in as in place-wise pertaining to sex trafficking? Could Andrea Tatum herself, the woman that was involved with both of these two men, could she have in fact been sex trafficking her own self, despite in her having two lovers? That's a question. That's a very abstract question, and yet it's a simple question, right? Because to know that a woman has struggled with drugs and could be desperate enough to pawn Gerald, the man who loved her before she got with Khalil, to know the woman could be desperate enough to want drugs and need drugs and pawn a ring way years long ago for some drugs, is to say she could be desperate to even do anything else for a drug fix, such as even trafficking her own body. Yes, Andrea Tatum, the woman that was killed by Khalil Tatum. Her history has to be questioned, because drug addiction as well as her jail record is in fact there, as it sits and stands questionable. That could be why, the reason why I'm saying that could be why a Gerald Wills came out his mouth and said it was possibly likely that Khalil Tatum could have trafficked Relisha Rudd. You see what I'm saying? That could be out of his mouth coming out saying that sort of thing. If Khalil, before he died, and during the time when Relisha came up missing, and even before, if Khalil himself could have been trafficking that girl, because if Andrea was that sort of individual, then that's to say that activity could have possibly went down somewhere. But see, even Gerald himself, sometimes people want to get their quick 15 minutes of fame, or even jumping on TV or in an interview and saying certain things that even them themselves have to be questioned, such as a Gerald Wills, because you got to listen to me on this. I can't really sit back and listen to everything a Gerald Wills say, because he himself may or may not be telling the all in all, such as the truth, or he could be throwing sex trafficking out there somewhat to take the focus and put it on himself, or take it off of himself. There could be attention diversion even than that. Him wanting his 15 minutes of fame, or maybe he didn't. Maybe Andrea was into sex trafficking. But on top of that, the reason why I can't really believe everything this man has said, because remember, he slept in a bed with a woman and shared a bed with a woman that was also with a Khalil Tatum. And the identity of a child looking like a father that could have been her father, Relisha, looking so much like that man, is to say there's possibly even clarity in that, as in the identity of whether or not Relisha was Khalil Tatum's daughter, and if Gerald Wills would have knew about it. Because to be sleeping that close with a woman and having sex and sharing her body, that, yes, with another man, you two men, it's to basically say Gerald Wills has to know a little bit more than what he's saying, even if the child that was her father, Khalil, Relisha. Gerald Wills would in fact know that sort of information, is what I'm trying to say. To be able to see through design is to say, as in a call out, even in that. What does Gerald Wills know? Because I can't see no woman, whether she's desperate for drugs. See, because look, listen to this. Information is prone to come out in even that, as in a telling. Because sometimes lovers, in fact, get jealous of one another. And sometimes people are known to not beat information out of people, but use sometimes substances to even get information out of a woman, such as a man, knowing she's desperate for drugs or something, and say that man want to know if that is Khalil's child. Would Gerald have did something like that? Wanting to know, because see, there has to be jealousy sometimes. To share a lover is to know. Let me think. If I am a man and I share a grown woman with another man, there's going to be jealousy issues in that, and it has to, because sometimes you're going to want that person's company where that other individual might not want to be with you. They might want to be with that other individual. See what I'm going with this? There could have been times where Gerald Wills wanted to have Andrea in his arms, but at other times, yes, and during those times, I'm sure Andrea wanted to be in the arms of Khalil. To go round and round with this to even say. Because it was known at times, like Andrea's boss stated even in the interview via email, when the boss of Andrea Tatum stated sometimes she can be loved by many and sometimes she can be hated by many. So I'm thinking the love and hate aspect has to, in fact, involve these two individuals, such as a Gerald Wills and a Khalil Tatum. It could involve other individuals, but you see where the woman has gone to her grave, Andrea. So to say something in the form of words in disguise via email, saying she was loved by many as well as hate by many, is to say the definition stands in even that. Pertaining to her men, who could have loved her more and who could have hated her more at times. That's why you don't really share lovers unless you really know what you're doing, because a mess can come out even that, and even a death on top of it. But for a woman to say be desperate for drugs and say she's with a man named Gerald or something, and say Khalil has a baby and the baby's name is Relisha, if she was blood to Khalil, little Relisha, say if that was the child's father, there could be a way even if Gerald wanted to know. He could have asked, yes, he could have asked Andrea while she was high. Because see, high people they have no senses. Their senses are not there. Their senses are in fact possibly, I don't know, heightened. Would it be heightened? But their senses, I'm thinking, would be not as keen as you and I, sober individuals. So I'm thinking, let me think. If Andrea was a full-blown crackhead or something at times, or meth addict, or whatever her drug of choice was, it's to say she could have been high at times, a lot of times, as she was a drug addict, as it was known. But not only that, that would have been the best time to get information out of that woman, such as a Gerald himself. FBI would know that. Police would know that. The best time that a Gerald, say if he questioned the identity of, say, Relisha being around Khalil too much or so much, even if Gerald, I'm sure Gerald had to have questioned that. Because he was little too close to everybody to begin with, sharing lovers. And then you see a child always around a grown man. He had to have questioned that sort of thing. And not only that, that information had to have come out even in bed while, say, Andrea Tatum was high, because that's the best time to get information out of somebody. Yes, it is. It's the best time to get information out of somebody is when somebody is a drug addict and they in desperate need of drugs. And so you try to get that information out of them before, and you promise them some drugs, or while they're high. Because a lot of times they ain't going to care what they say. That's the point of them being high, so that they don't have to deal with real life to begin with. They could care, some of them could care less even with getting killed, depending on if they're paranoid or not. If they're not paranoid, they ain't going to care. They'll just release possibly anything while you're questioning them, right? So I'm thinking it would have been the same thing if Gerald himself, being a grown man, paying attention, and him watching and scoping out that a Khalil Tatum is spending too much time with a little girl, 8 years old, Relisha Rudd. He had to have questioned what was going on. And not only that, he had to somewhere have questioned something about the little girl to Andrea Tatum, because they were lovers. And what grown man wouldn't? And if Andrea had a past of sex trafficking herself or something, that sort of thing would have somewhat been known, or possibly all the way been known to Gerald. But not only that, there's more to even that. He still didn't say whether Relisha was Khalil's child, and yet he shared a bed with a woman that was in fact Khalil's. So what's the issue with this? And not only that, once again from the beginning going back, not only does Gerald know all this, now his mother plays into it, such as EDNA Young, the mother sharing the same name as a child that has, the mother sharing the same last name. Yes, Gerald's mother sharing the same last name as the child's mother. Yes, Relisha's mother. And the child has gone missing. So where's Gerald in all this? He just seemed like he just drifting in the daytime somewhere like nothing. That is just so odd. All this happened back around February, March 2014. And many of us have yet to see any more of Gerald. Because lovers are known to get down, and yes, they are, in the dark or in the daytime or wherever. And lovers being that sort of way, that's to say confidential information is going to in fact be shared. And it in fact has to be there. Because remember, if Andrea was involved with Khalil and she didn't file for divorce, both of them filed for divorce voluntarily at the courts. Yes, Andrea Tatum and Khalil filed for divorce February 2014. If that woman was involved with Khalil, this is why I'm saying Gerald has to know more than what he's saying. Gerald Wills. If he watched this video, he'll know. That man has to know a little bit more, because if you are a woman and you're involved and married with a man, and say you've been involved and married with that man for over 2 decades, that's to say y'all had to have married back in 1993. Yes, Andrea and Khalil had to have married back in 1993 or 1994, right before Khalil went to jail. He went to jail in 1993. That's when he really somewhat started going back, right? Back and forth to jail. That's to say, hold up, let me pause. That's to say that that woman, Andrea, would have questioned, because see, if Relisha was Khalil's child, then Relisha didn't come till later. So that's to say, that's why I'm questioning. See where I'm picking the abstraction as I'm sitting here? If a man marries a woman right before he goes to jail, or marry her while he's in the four walls of jail, yes, you can't do that, right? In 1993 is when he set foot in jail, Khalil. And say he's married to a woman for 2 decades, right? But in this mess, this sort of whole mess here sitting, that if Relisha Rudd was Khalil's daughter, as in the child, that's to say Khalil had to have cheated on Andrea at some point in time, because Relisha was only 8 years old, and yet Andrea Tatum and Khalil Tatum was married for 2 decades. From 1993 up until 2014 would have in fact marked 2 decades, about 20 years. So that's to say somewhere, if, yes, if Khalil was that child's father, Relisha, that's to say that Khalil had to have in fact cheated on Andrea with Relisha's mother, Shamika Young, as in had full-blown sex and whatever else on top of that. So how would Andrea have felt about that sort of thing pertaining to their relationship, and now him having a child, and possibly a secret child, if she knew or didn't know about it? I just went at that at all angles in one sentence. Because Andrea was murdered in the end, and then Khalil turned the gun on himself, which should say there was in fact more secrets there than was told. Because Khalil struggled with drugs himself, and not only that, he was deep in poverty, and he had a drug record just like Andrea did. Those sort of people had that sort of thing in common. But also Gerald Wills, I don't know if he had a jail record, but he had the same thing in common with all of them as well. Because like-minded individuals usually carry the same type of record, and sleeping and being lovers and all the rest, and even knowing secret information, confidential information pertaining to detail and signs of where all doesn't even add up, or even sometimes not fit together, and yet it does, pertaining to what I just stated. How would Andrea Tatum know, once again, that her husband Khalil Tatum, when she was alive, possibly went off 9 years somewhere in the mess? Because if Relisha went missing and she was 8 years old, a baby is made the year before. So somewhere, yes, somewhere in their marriage, if that was the father, that's to say that Shamika possibly was sleeping. Shamika Young, Relisha's mother, was possibly sleeping with Khalil Tatum, the man that was supposedly the abductor, and possibly a child came out of that. Which is why Gerald Wills keep becoming questionable, because if his mother was EDNA Young, then that's to say he's in fact, yes, if EDNA Young, I'm repeating again, and I should, because there's a triangle fashion in even this with these people. If Shamika Young, Relisha Rudd's mother, say was sleeping with Andrea's husband, Khalil Tatum, right? Then that's to say, once again, Gerald Wills had to have known something, because his mother was EDNA Young. So that means that, in fact, if the mother is really EDNA Young, I'm repeating for the 4th time, If the mother was Edna Young or Gerald Wills, then that's to say Shamika Young, Relisha's mother, and Gerald Wills are first cousins or something. They had to have been. They had to have been, because didn't I just say this in the beginning? If I set Edna Young on paper side by side or standing here still, set Edna Young on one side and say possibly set Melissa Young, Relisha's grandmother, side by side with that individual, and both of them hold the same name, then what does that tell you? The same last name. What does that tell you? Somewhere along the line, that's why I said family tree. Unless it's a coincidence that both of them hold the last. Maybe it's a coincidence and I'm seeing too far into something that is not there. But the Young name is in fact a given, but from somewhere, right? If you put Edna Young next to Melissa Young, Relisha's grandmother, and Edna Young is Gerald Wills' mother, those women would have to be somewhat slightly on and off in age, I'm thinking. Because when it said in the interview that Edna Young was putting her grandkids to bed, and then somehow a phone call came in that Andrea was killed, and Andrea was known to call Edna Young her mom. She called her mom, but that wasn't her mom, right? She called the woman her mom because supposedly that's Gerald Wills' mom. So to be involved love-wise, as in lovers, two lovers going together, and your grown man lover has a mother, to say you would in fact call her mom, yes. Which is what Andrea Tatum did. She called that woman mom because that was his mom. But where does Edna Young fit when you align her next to Melissa Young, Relisha's grandmother? How far in age would they be off in all this? Because I'm thinking if Gerald Wills, that man has to be somewhere around the age, Gerald Wills has to be somewhere around the age of Shamika Young. Has to have been. He could have been slightly older or possibly younger, who knows, but I'm thinking Gerald Wills would be somewhere around the age of Andrea Wills. Not Andrea Wills. Gerald Wills would be somewhere around the age of Andrea Tatum, and Andrea Tatum will be somewhere around the age of Khalil Tatum. And so I would have to set Edna side by side once again with Melissa Young, which is Shamika Young's mother. So are they not? I need you, the viewer, to get back to me before I make more videos. So are they or are they not blood relatives? These young individuals. And I don't mean Relisha, but she would in fact play into that as well. Because if Edna Young and Shamika Young, the mother of Relisha, if they're in fact blood relatives, then that's to say, wait a minute, then that's to say Gerald Wills, yes, I'm repeating over and over because I don't want to slip out of the measurement and even where I'm aligning these individuals at. Because if Gerald Wills is related to Shamika Young, Relisha's mother, then that's to say even he would have to know something more about Relisha's whereabouts or something. And not in the direction of Khalil. Gerald Wills, I'm thinking a little bit he would know, because that will possibly be Relisha's father, Khalil being Relisha's father. But I'm thinking if Gerald Wills is related to Relisha's, the child's mother, if Gerald Wills is related to Shamika Young, Relisha's mother, then he has to have to know a lot more information. Because not only do you be in love with the woman that done got killed by the husband, Andrea herself, but now Gerald Wills is here playing a cousin, yes, being a relative to Shamika as well as to Relisha. So where is the young girl at? Where's the little girl at? Where is he at? Stuff like that make me mad, because people walk around, oh, I ain't gonna get involved with that, but you was good enough to sit and lay amongst Andrea Tatum and lay down and have sex with her and possibly made God knows what, possibly viral diseases, but you don't want to tell where this little girl done went in her whereabouts. I'm saying that right there goes all the way around in full motion in a circle, what I just stated. Gerald Wills, if he's related to Shamika Young, Relisha's mother, then he is in fact not just Relisha's cousin, but Shamika's as well, the child's mother. And not only that, he was also involved with Andrea before she died, Khalil's wife. So is he just one of those individuals that say, I ain't getting involved in that? I'm going to just say, well, the little girl was trafficked and that is that. No, I don't think so. Because even if you are a cousin to Shamika, you would in fact know the history about your own cousin relative. If Edna Young and Shamika's, let me see, if Edna Young, so how would they be related? Would Edna Young, Gerald Wills' mother, and Shamika Young, as well as Shamika's mother, Melissa Young, I'm thinking would those two individuals, Shamika's mother and Gerald Wills' mother, would those two individuals be sisters? Would they be sisters? I need somebody to answer me back before I make any more videos. I need somebody to answer me back pertaining to that detail. Would they be sisters? Because that sounds about right. And yet I could be off. To say where you're liable to make a mistake and all this, the looking up and all this other stuff, is to even call your own self, my own self out where I could be wrong. Because I don't want anybody to think I'm misleading them or misguiding them when I'm not. I'm just stating truth and facts. What I see as in me verifying in the process. That something about that is not right. How is Gerald Wills having a mother that could more than likely be connected to Shamika's mother? To Shamika and her mother, and yet a child goes missing. And then you done had a love triangle fiasco with that in the center of it. Because not only would Gerald Wills know about Shamika if he's blood related to her, not only would Gerald Wills possibly know where that child had went if she wasn't murdered at the hands of Khalil Tatum, not only outside of sex trafficking, I'm saying there has to be more to that. Not only would he know if that was the child's father, because I said before, drug heads are known to come out when they're high and tell the identification, or even if a child belongs to a man. I could see Andrea Tatum doing something like that, even if it was by accident or something crazy. So I'm saying, not only that, Gerald Wills will possibly knew the identity of the child in relation to the man, Khalil, the abductor, like they like to call him. He might not even been an abductor. He could have been the child's father. Gerald would know that. But more than anything, if Gerald is blood relatives to Shamika, he would know everything all up and down the block, because even the streets are telling. The streets are completely telling, let me tell you. What is to be known and what is to not be known and what is to be hidden and sometimes provoked, as in a stop saying this, stop saying that, don't say this, or go do tell this because it's gossip and this and this and that. It's to say the streets hold that information, but more than anything, Gerald Wills will even play a part of that, the street activity. Because let me tell you this, for a Gerald Wills to have had a history in the streets, Gerald Wills, pertaining to Andrea Tatum, if that grown man have had a history of drug possession and being out in the streets, is to say he could have more than likely sold drugs himself. And not only to have a girlfriend that he shared with another man, right, that had a drug history, and say Andrea could have been known to prostitute or do something in the form of sex trafficking, is to know once again Gerald Wills had to have played a part of that as well. Because like-minded individuals roll together. And if a woman is out here selling her body, or even if her husband is out here selling her, that points back to Gerald Wills as well. Because he was with the woman before the woman went off. Gerald Wills was with Andrea Tatum before Andrea Tatum even went and got married to Khalil Tatum. And so I'm sure Andrea possibly had a history of even prostitution that even a Gerald Wills would know about. Because he may or may not have prostituted her in the process as well. Because a lot of times when people are drug addicts and they're into drugs, or possibly even in connection to selling drugs, that's all relatable activity. People know, and yes, they do know who is doing what and why. Even if a woman is prostituting herself even before she got around Khalil himself, and she was involved in bed lover-wise with Gerald Wills, yes, while she was doing it, possibly trafficking herself, prostituting herself or whatever, that man Gerald Wills would in fact know that sort of thing. Which is why it was strange to me when he said Khalil Tatum could have more than likely trafficked Relisha Rudd. I'm thinking to myself, well, if you're the cousin of Relisha Rudd, why ain't you coming out telling the fact that you're Shamika Young's cousin, if you are blood cousin on top of that, as you are also Relisha Rudd's blood cousin? But not only that, there's street activity behind that pertaining to who you were, your identity, if you're off drugs today, dear Gerald, if you're off drugs today. But what is it, the activity you were doing, you and Andrea Tatum, even before Andrea became a Tatum, marrying Khalil Tatum years later? What were you and her doing together? Yes, pertaining to even possibly sex trafficking. That sort of information has to go down, as in being printed right here on this screen. Because the woman once again pawned his ring, Gerald Wills, before she even got with Khalil Tatum. That's to know she was desperately in need of drugs. She would do anything, which is to say also a woman like that is known and prone to pawn a ring to be desperate for drugs. She would do anything, not just in that, but she would do anything possibly enough to sell her own body. And that's to say that possibly could have been going down, yes, with Andrea before she even got with Khalil. It was going down more than likely when she was with Gerald Wills. If that's Shamika's cousin, I would go even ask somebody on the street, and possibly Shamika herself, about that sort of thing. These people are all paired together in drug activity, and it's all scandalous. The mark, just what I stated. They're all paired together in drug. Gerald Wills, Andrea Tatum, Khalil Tatum, and Shamika Young. And possibly Gerald Wills being Shamika Young's cousin, and possibly not even wanting nobody to know that sort of thing. So what happened with the child? They done dragged this poor little girl all into this mess of their ordeal of the crack addiction and drug addiction, heroin, meth, and all this other stuff of trafficking, if that sort of thing went into as well. But I'm thinking Gerald Wills would know more than likely than anything. I can keep sensing that. As in, I'm saying sex traffic may or may not have played a part of that, only if the link is the child, say, was Khalil's child. I can't see Khalil, no, I can't see him committing suicide and then just taking his child and trafficking her off. I can't see that. I cannot see that. Because he chose to stay with a woman that was involved with another man. You see what I'm saying? He chose to stay with a woman that was involved with another man. He chose to do that. Let me see. He chose to keep disclosed whether Shamika, he had sex with Shamika and got her pregnant. He was doing all type of things with the little girl. That's not to say I'm not saying that sort of thing, that I'm not saying Khalil Tatum possibly didn't traffic Relisha. I didn't say that. But there's a reason why the man's identity pertaining to who he is in relation to the child is not there. Stories have gaps in them that need to be filled, is what I'm trying to say. And yet even their story is telling to who could knew what and why. And Gerald has to in fact know. I can sense he does. I can sense that, man, and I don't know why that is. I don't know why that is. I'm sensing Gerald Wills has to have known who Relisha actually was, as in her identity, or whether Khalil was her father or not. I'm sensing that. Because for a man to be picking up a woman, as this woman is sharing herself with her body, Andrea, for a man, Gerald Wills, to be picking up a Andrea from a home of, say, even a hotel room or wherever them two connected together, Andrea meeting Gerald, is to say that's a little bit close, don't you think? Andrea having sex one day and one night would say, or a few days and a few nights or years, with Khalil, and then she turns around, hops out of the bed, and then go meet up with Gerald Wills and have sex, and they're playing like they're just lovers and lovers on end for years on end. For damn near over 30 something years or whatever the man stated he knew her for as long. He said he was deeply in love with her. That's what Gerald Wills stated. Gerald Wills, where are you? Because that don't make sense. How are y'all two close lovers? Because they weren't detached from each other. Andrea and Gerald was not detached. I'm sure it could have been days where even Andrea herself possibly went over to Gerald Wills' home and spent the night. Took showers and everything else, and probably ate up his food and his meals. And them sick and whole conversations of even they drug activity and possibly sex trafficking. That's a middle ground right there. I just filled some type of gap in by even using Andrea's name and Gerald on top of that. I just filled in a gap where even that was loose, as in a loose string where it hung all the way out. Because if Andrea is going over Gerald, I can't see, because even that would have been on somewhere on a hotel tape of, say, a Gerald Wills meeting up to have sex or whatever else, because they were still lovers together up until she died. Andrea Tatum, Gerald Wills was still possibly having sex and loving on that woman and making love to her when no one was around, and possibly not even when Khalil was around, right? They were still involved with each other even up until the woman's death, because Khalil killed Andrea, right? But I'm thinking, nowhere would it have been found on no surveillance tape of, say, Gerald himself walking into a hotel room, any hotel room, or where, say, Andrea was staying with Khalil. I don't think that sort of thing would have happened. So for them to have full-blown sex, Andrea with Gerald, is to say she had to walk into someone's home in order to do that, and possibly his, wherever Gerald stayed at. If she stayed the night at any time, and I'm thinking Khalil would have had to know, which is why a question of why did they file for divorce. Maybe she was just tired of Khalil and the way that he carried himself or something. I don't know. But that's to say that once again, even if they filed divorce, maybe Khalil had to have known, because to be with a woman for that many years is to know somewhere along the way you're going to find out that even if she's cheating on you or something with another man. So they must have had to had an agreement on Andrea being allowed to be in a relationship with Gerald while she was in a relationship with Khalil. All of them must, as a pack or something like that, they must have had to made an agreement on that. But once again, ain't no sex going down with no Gerald in no hotel room, and possibly Khalil's hotel room, to have sex with Andrea. I'm thinking Andrea more than likely would have went over Gerald's house to have sex with him. Ate up his food, made dinner, poured some drinks, poured some wine, had a beer, possibly used drugs together. And if they had sex trafficking ordeals to begin with, then even Gerald will play into that as well. See, just don't let somebody do something and then think they're going to get off and walk away by just doing an interview and then somebody not coming and stringing and tying something together, trying to find out, well, how does Gerald Wills play into this? Because he in fact does. And I just don't think Andrea telling him, oh, well, possibly Relisha was sex trafficked. No, I think something more had to go down. Because Gerald Wills had a past of drug history. And possibly sex trafficking himself. Something stands there with even Gerald Wills that he is not saying. I said that for the 5th or 10th time. Gerald Wills knows something pertaining to even sex trafficking himself. Yes, he has to have had to. Because listen to me on this. People don't pay attention enough. If a Gerald Wills is bold enough to come out his mouth and tell everybody on TV and the news and Washington Post that Andrea Tatum possibly got killed by Khalil Tatum because she knew something that possibly Relisha was sex trafficked. If a man is bold enough to come out and say all of that, as in a woman he shared with somebody else going to tell him that, then that woman would have been bold enough to even tell whether Relisha was Khalil's child or not. You think he had to have known? Gerald has to have known, and possibly still do today, whether Relisha is Khalil's child, because you're not just going to bypass some big information of sex trafficking of Khalil trafficking the child, and then say if the child was Khalil's, them looking just alike. You bypass that. Yes, and the information there, Gerald and Andrea not telling you. You see what I'm going? That don't make sense. Why would Andrea not tell you that was the child's father, but then tell you that man Khalil was trafficking Relisha? That does not make sense. That's out of line as well as in the clue. Because see, if Edna Young is who she says she is, I'm going back again, that's to say they're all connected with each other. Even Gerald himself, by blood relation. That's all too close for Gerald not to say and not know anything. That's too close. That all ties in as well. That's completely too close. You don't know where a child whereabouts is. You don't know whether that was a child's father or not. And yet you can possibly be Shamika's cousin. As in your mother and her mother possibly sisters or something. That don't make sense. I could very well be wrong in trying to see if these people was blood relatives. You should hang on in even that. Because something is wrong with that. But not only that, to say then if Gerald knew about Andrea knowing based off of her telling him that Relisha was sex trafficked by Khalil Tatum, that's once again to say Andrea sometime in her life had to been into prostitution herself or some form of sex trafficking or something. Just enough for even Khalil to know that that sort of thing was happening. Even if he wasn't in, because see, look, you got some lovers that are crackheads together or drug addicts, a man and a woman, and they're involved before another man come and get in a relationship with that woman, right? Because see, a woman that's a drug addict, she will spread her thin even by just passing her body around for the form of drugs, which is why I stated that. So I'm saying a man oftentimes, when he has drug addictions, and even he can be desperate for drugs, right? Such as a Gerald, it's to say he could have a woman, which is why a lot of times they like to use drugs together. Yes, men and women a lot of times in relationships is how sometimes they even come together in relationships because they share the same things, such as a drug habit. So they like to a lot of times share drugs together. And not only that, a man oftentimes, once he's in a relationship sharing a lady, they're sharing a drug together. Sometimes he would in fact pimp that woman out, pimp her out. So I wonder if a Gerald have did that to Andrea. before Andrea got with Khalil and they was doing this whole love triangle, or somewhat on the way, or right when they was all together? Could Khalil have been, could Gerald, could he have in fact been pimping out Andrea somewhere in all this? Because to pimp somebody out is to in fact say that's sex trafficking as well. That's what pimps do. And yet you ain't got to be no big baller pimp. You might in fact make her go sleep with another man and sleep with something in order to obtain drugs or drug money through even the sleeping process of making your woman go have sex with a man so y'all can get some drugs or something. That's a loose string, as in it sits there, and it has to. Because I question even Gerald himself. And even that, how many times would he or could he have had Andrea go sleep with another man for some drug money, knowing that is in fact pimping and somewhat sex trafficking along the way? Yes, it is. It has to be, because a woman like that will pass her around eeny, meeny, miny, mo in the process of laying down in bed just to get some drug money or some drugs. And more likely her man, being the more sole dominant figure, will be the individual to go tell her to do that, so that they both can have drugs in their possession. Because if you're deep in poverty and you don't have no money, is to know right where to go. That man telling his woman, go over there and sleep with such and such because I need to get whatever for that. Some money for our drug habit for that. So Gerald had to have played some part in even that. I can see that. I grew up in an environment where it was infested with drugs and all type of things. And you see all type of things in the daytime as well as in the nighttime. What some of these men will in fact have their grown adult women doing to go get some money for a fix and a high so that they can share the drug amongst themselves. And sometimes they even had petty fights amongst themselves over who done got too much of the drug, such as crack or heroin or something. No, you got too much. No, I got too much. Okay, well, you got too much. See what I'm saying? So what part did Gerald do in even that? Possibly picking fights or something because somebody got too much of the drug and yet somebody else didn't. After a woman done went laid and let somebody get between her legs to get some money for their high. I just can see that. I don't know why I can see that. Andrea had to have had a history of sex trafficking and prostitution or something. Andrea had to. There's no bypassing that in the lane. No, it's not. There's no luxury in that. And I'm not trying to say anything bad. I'm not trying to put anybody down. But once again, we must look, yes, at the fact that a Relisha Rudd is missing. A young 8-year-old child back then. She was missing, and she's still missing today. Despite how many years have passed. I don't care how many years pass, I will still stand on this camera and question. And I don't care who don't like me in that. Because some of these trolls online try to tell you what to not do, what to not say, and yet they ain't doing nothing. That's why they're trolls. So let me see. And I mean that pertaining to not people giving you information of what you should say, not them. That's not trolling. For somebody to say, you know what, you should do a Relisha Rudd video, that is in fact not trolling. I'm speaking on people that say, oh, why would you ask about, when I did Asia Degree videos, when I'm even doing these videos, why would you say that such and such was in a love triangle and Shamika had to have been part of the love triangle as well? Because that's what it is. If Shamika was sleeping with Khalil, who was sleeping with Andrea, who was sleeping with Gerald, what does that tell you pertaining to a missing child? That say that involves all four of them and not just one man, Khalil himself, going off killing himself. All them individuals and him killing Andrea as well, that points to two living individuals being alive today. Gerald himself on one side and Shamika on the other, as well as both of their mothers who could possibly be sisters. That's why you question that sort of thing. And not be telling me to shut up, because I will tell you to shut up and possibly where to go. Because if you don't question this and say police put Relisha Rudd's case on the back burner, if you don't question this sort of thing of what I'm asking, that little girl possibly could even be mad. Because see, I was at fault in the beginning when I said, well, more than likely surveillance tape. And then when this other individual stated, no, you are not a troll, dear Taylor. You are not a troll because you actually opened my eyes. But I'm speaking about all these other lames when they say, oh, why would you even question the mother like that? Because you need to. And when I question Asia Degree's mother, because I needed to. Because if a case is being put over to the side, that's to say it might not be looked at. Does that make sense? For the trolls that watch you and then they want to come poke you in the eye and say, stop doing that. Or talk nice. Talk nice. Don't talk like that. No, I need to talk just like I am. Because possibly somebody will pay attention to me even speaking firm in that. Yes. Sometimes to have people listen to you is to in fact speak firm in place of all of that trying to be speaking all soft. Especially when it comes to missing children. Because that's to in fact make somebody stand up straight and get in line and listen to you. See what I'm saying? And not be all soft. I don't want to hear anybody talking about no missing child going somewhere or going off somewhere or possibly killed. And I'm talking soft about that. I can't do that sort of thing. Nobody wants to hear that. Because they possibly, and me talking soft, they possibly will get soothed right to sleep. And me talking that way. Oh, your voice is so soothing. You just put me right to sleep. I'm sure I would. No, I'd rather talk firm and bold. Yeah, I'm thinking, I said the coincidence aspect about this man's mother's last name being the same as Shamika's, if that's a coincidence, could be so. Who knows? But I can only ask. I can only ask. Because see, Gerald Wills sharing that Andrea, you don't never know what all Gerald Wills was told by Andrea about Khalil and his activity outside of just sex trafficking, which is why the identity of that child has to stay there as in stick. Because if you know that much, then why can't you come out, dear Gerald, and say much more of the identity of the man who everybody think has abducted Relisha? Why can't you come out and say who that man actually is? You did share a bed with his woman, and I'm sure she was prone to tell. I don't think Relisha was sex trafficked. The only way I can see that is if that was not that child's father. That's the only way I can see that. But why does she look so much like him? And him buying her things. That's to say, somewhere in this mess, in the love triangle, Khalil had to have gotten Shamika pregnant. And why isn't Shamika coming out saying anything? She's too busy getting high on drugs. You see what I'm saying? So not only do we have the mother possibly out somewhere in the streets getting on drugs, partying and being all on Facebook and showing that off, and yet not showing none of the pictures of her children, bragging about this, about loving her children. Not only do you got her as one party going off and using drugs, now you got to still ask and question, is Gerald still on drugs today? Does a man still struggle with drugs today? Because if he does, that's to say he's more likely entertaining his drug more so than entertaining the matter of trying to help police and FBI find Relisha. You got what I'm saying? That don't add up. To be too far off in drugs is to not even care of where a missing child is at, and possibly even a grown man himself, because he didn't put himself out there enough to even tell police, FBI, who he was, if he was blood related. That don't make sense. That does not make sense. He more likely didn't want. See, there has to be more to Gerald of why he don't even want. Say if he is blood relatives to Relisha's mother. Gerald, if that man is blood relatives to Relisha's mother, and say say Gerald and Shamika is first cousins or possibly even second cousins. Who know? I'm thinking first cousins or something in that. Something about it is off and not right. But I'm thinking the reason why a grown man possibly wouldn't want a FBI chief of police or sheriff's office to know that he's blood related to the child's mother of a child that went missing could be more than likely because he has a drug habit that still stands there today. I don't know why that is. And he wouldn't want the focus on him because to be handling drug transactions back and forth, which is against the law, Gerald himself doing this. If he still struggled with drugs, he wouldn't want the police eyes on him, which is possibly why he never stated he was blood relatives to Shamika. Yes, possibly because he's doing things against the law. And so he don't want the eyes or the focus on him. So to take the focus off of himself and not put it there is to never say that he's blood relatives with Shamika or something. And if he knows more information, to not say more because he's involved or something in drug transactions or something about that. See, an individual could be doing drugs as well as selling drugs or something, and so to not put themselves there in helping to find and discover a missing child, it's in fact take the focus off themselves by putting the focus on somebody else. I said attention diversion, so that Gerald wouldn't have to be questioned more by FBI and teams of police and all that and chief of police, so Gerald wouldn't have to be questioned of even his identity of what he's doing today in relation to in connection of why could Relisha go missing in the first place. Because if you're out here selling drugs and you're a grown man by the name of Gerald selling drugs or using drugs, that's to say you're more than likely are doing a bad deed to society, and that sort of thing gets people arrested, which is why that sort of individual wouldn't want to say much more, but just saying the child could be sex trafficked and leave it at that. Because if he start working along, if Gerald start coming out his mouth and work along with police by saying more of whether Khalil was Relisha's father or saying more of where Relisha possibly may be at or something, I'm thinking Gerald himself could possibly even go to jail in that, because he lives an atmosphere that surrounds drugs and he possibly could be involved in that sort of thing. Gerald was drugs. Because to be that close, dear Gerald, yes, I'm calling out to you, to be that close to all this family activity, Shamika and all this, and possibly knowing Shamika got pregnant by Khalil Tatum, would have to be for you, Gerald, to tell even the police that, and yet you didn't. If you knew. So that's to say Gerald or something must be in some drugs or something. Because I'm thinking a loving man, just enough to love of Andrea, as he stated, would even take the time to come out of his day and stop some affairs of what he's doing to tell police what more was going on, even between him and Andrea and Khalil Tatum. And I'm saying that because I recognize where Gerald said Khalil couldn't have loved Andrea all that much if Khalil killed Andrea. And yet, dear Gerald, you're not even coming out saying much more to even that pertaining to the mess. Because, see, women are known, yes, they are, to play games and hold secrets and not tell stuff. Women that's involved with two men at once, right? But if both of these men know the identity of each other and what they're doing and know that they have a woman they're both involved with, that's to say at times when that woman get mad at the other lover, she might go and say something to that other lover she's involved with about that man she's mad at. But she's involved with both of them. You see what I'm saying? So Gerald, in fact, has to know much more of something. Because even to be involved in crime, such as selling drugs, using drugs, prostitution, is to say over time you may or may not care and getting in trouble. And yet so many individuals do. But sometimes some of these women are unafraid, as in they don't care what comes out of their mouth, and them purposely saying, say if I was Andrea, let me think if I was Andrea, because you gotta try to come from an angle of how a woman might have thought if she was involved with two men, and not only that, being bed lovers, sleeping and sex with them at the same time. I'm thinking of Andrea, seeming Gerald said that she was loved and hated by many, loved by many, hated by many. I'm thinking Andrea herself, despite her criminal activity and history, such as past, before she died, and even years before, I'm thinking Andrea shared both men, but she possibly could have at times gotten mad at both men at times. Today she might have been mad at one of them, and then she possibly ran off and spent time with another one, which was Khalil. Say if it was Gerald and she was with Gerald. No, let me reverse that. Let me go back. Say Andrea was with Khalil because they were married or whatever, even though she knew Gerald longer. Say Andrea was involved with Khalil, right? And say Khalil made her mad for the day, and then possibly fighting and not fist fighting. I don't know, because I didn't live there. But say she went off and she goes and she conversates with Gerald, right? Her and Gerald possibly, she probably gonna tell him how much she hate and can't stand Khalil. But she possibly would have said it to Khalil's face, or maybe not. She possibly just told Gerald. And then once Gerald did the same thing of pissing her off, made her mad, then Andrea possibly would tell that to Khalil. Who knows if he knew about the relationship? I'm thinking he had to for years. She possibly went over to Khalil and will be telling Khalil, I can't stand him, I hate him, whatever, talking about Gerald. And she would be saying that to Khalil in his face. Because women are prone to do that sort of thing. Listen to me when I say, recognize what I say. The point and angle of a woman, when you talk to them, and then when you don't do things in which they want you to do, or you do things that they don't like you being a man, they would in fact go back and forth of telling this man this, how she hates him, the other one over here, and then she'll move away from him once she hates him and go tell him over here. Women do that sort of thing, and they do that every day because women like drama and all that other stuff, right? And not only that, some of these women be thinking they high class and all that other stuff, despite many of them still being low class, right? Yes, that's not to say nothing bad. That's just to be descriptive of how women do things. And many more of them pick fights with their man, because some women get a rise out of that, just fighting. More so black women than anything. I can't tell you about white women because the focus right now is black women. But women do in fact pick fights sometimes with their men. And to be involved with two men is to say what time of the day and where could your whereabouts be, and you're picking fights with that sort of thing. And what information is coming out your mouth as you're doing it. Dear Andrea, she's in the grave. But I had to ask and say that pertaining to Gerald himself, of what he won't say. I'm thinking arguments sometimes had to have been going on between Gerald Wills and Andrea Tatum, and had to have been, because she was being shared. And didn't I state that before? It had to have been times where even he would have gotten jealous because he would have wanted to spend time with her, where maybe she wanted to go off and do something else. He probably would have slapped her upside the head, and not physically, but yes, with information to say, well, you're always out there with Khalil, or you're always somewhere when I want to spend time. Because for a man to end the whole interview and all that by saying he was still in love with her and that was my girl, just the way that he said it, how much he was in love with her, is to know he had to have jealousy tendencies at times. And to have jealous tendencies is to put up a fight, and possibly not physically, who knows, I don't think so, between them two, and yet information come out, because a woman will just get bitter enough to say some stuff that you would have never thought would have came out her mouth, and I'm sure it did, coming out of Andrea's mouth. You don't never know what Andrea got mad about at any time of the day, or her even fighting with Gerald pertaining to even if the child was Khalil's child. She could have said anything. Well, I'm going to go over here and form a family with Khalil and maybe the daughter, if that was, yes, if Relisha was Khalil's child. You never know what is said during fights, as fights go down. Arguments, not fist fights, arguments between lovers. That sort of thing does happen a lot more common than people want to realize or even say. Even Gerald himself. What type of arguments did you have with Andrea before she died, and even way before, if Relisha was born and she was 8 years old when she came up missing? You had a few 8 good years to argue with even her about that. The baby being born. And on top of that, I have to question, see, because I'm gonna make a whole bunch of videos compiled about that. Why did they divorce? That's one of the videos. Why did they divorce? Why was Khalil playing as a doctor to this young Relisha Rudd, this child? Why was the mother and the grandmother writing notes for him? That goes in with that as well. What happened during that time period of when Relisha went missing pertaining to the school, and everybody noticing that she was missing, right? In that gap, that 2 to 3 week period time, right? What else is the other videos I was going to make in relation to why did Andrea and Khalil get divorced? I have to question, yes, again, how in the way could say Andrea, if she would have been sex trafficking herself or in a prostitution herself, I just stated that in the video, that had to have at one time included Gerald. It had to have included Gerald at one time for even him to be knowing whatever, right? What else could we question about young Relisha? Because there's a lot of videos I want to compile pertaining to even her. Could Dr. Tatum, as Khalil was going by, as Shamika and her mother, Relisha's grandmother, wanted him to go by and was sending notes to the school saying Dr. Tatum need to take her out of school, could Dr. Tatum actually stand for drug usage? Such as the grandmother and the child's mother, Shamika Young, if they were calling that grown man, Khalil Tatum, calling him Dr. Tatum because maybe he was in fact giving off drugs they were abusing them, the child's grandmother and mother. And that could be why, such as IVs, shooting drugs and heroin needles and all that other stuff into a vein, and calling somebody like that a Dr. Tatum, despite you using it as an excuse to pull a child out of school. You got to look at this at all type of angles like I do. To shift in gear is to say, pertaining to that, there's a reason, there's a much more deeper reason why they would in fact use a Dr. Tatum outside of saying that's the child's uncle or something. They would have reversed roles or something with even Khalil himself, the supposed abductor of Relisha. I'm thinking the grandmother and mother would have said he was the uncle or something, not father, because they wanted to keep whatever secret possibly with that. But they would have used another term, cousin, older cousin, or something like that, and not use the form of a Dr. Tatum. That's in fact say drugs is there with Relisha's mother, possibly even today it has to be. I'm thinking that's what Dr. Tatum stood for, was drug usage, and possibly IV, with him giving the grandmother and mother drugs, and them being desperate for drugs as well. That has to go, that fits right in. Because all I can, when I heard the name Dr. Tatum, the quickest thing that came to my mind was drug abuse on the end of Shamika and her mother. Yes, the grandmother. Drug abuse by ways of IV and heroin or something in relation to that. That's what made me think of Dr. Tatum. More so him servicing and serving Shamika as well as a grandmother more so than the child. That's what I'm thinking. I could be wrong, Dr. Tatum. Because to service somebody is in fact give them their fix when they need it, when they're trying to endure the withdrawal process of coming down from a high and needing some drugs again. I'm thinking Dr. Tatum stands for that or something, because to be that close and then be even more close to a young child is to say Shamika must have possibly even gotten pregnant or something by Khalil or something while she was high or something. Something about that is not right, which could be why she's not saying. You think Shamika was high as a kite when she got pregnant or something by Khalil Tatum, say if that's the child's father, and that could be why she's not saying anything, because even that could be possibly be embarrassing. Be embarrassing for a grown woman to be high off of crack or heroin and then lay up and let a grown man say have sex in the process with her while she's high as a kite, and then later on is found out that he was in fact her drug man, right? As well as her supposed drug doctor injecting her something with drugs or providing the drug that she got high off of before he had sex with her. You don't know about people. Okay, let me look. These videos be long. Let me see. Yep, Gerald will know a lot more about Relisha's personality. He would know who that child exactly is. I'm sorry I have to say, dear Gerald Wills. You would in fact know who Relisha is and was, her personality, as well as who her daddy was and all the rest. Because somewhere in this, Gerald Wills, his eyes had to have met with Relisha's eyes in person. Andrea's lover, Gerald Wills, would have had to have met in person with Relisha's eyes and possibly even looked and seen the mannerism of the child just enough to say, possibly to himself, you know what? That little girl Relisha, if he was never told, that little girl Relisha looks like Khalil enough to say that he could be the father. Yes, Khalil being possibly Relisha's father, right? I'm thinking Gerald would have stood there if nobody told him. I'm thinking that should have been the first thing he should have came out his mouth and said in his interview. You know what? I think Relisha is Khalil's daughter. That's what he should have said. But there recognition stands in even that. There has to be more why that man didn't say that. Because if you and I look from far away and can see where Khalil as well as Relisha look just alike side by side in pictures where I seen, and hundreds of people have saw that sort of thing, is to say Gerald Wills had to have some type of connection with even Relisha just enough to see and look in her eyes, even if he stood there how many times in her face while dropping Andrea off, or however Andrea got to where Khalil was at for her to go home, right? That's to say Gerald had to have stood there somewhere and his eyes met that little girl's eyes and possibly even saw the mannerism of where even the little girl possibly acted like Khalil at times. Grown men are able to see that sort of thing. Dear God, universe, or whatever. Grown men are able to even see and recognize mannerism in a child if she acts a sort of way like her father in a sense, where everybody else is not being able to see that sort of thing because we wasn't in person with all these individuals of who could have did what and why. And yet Gerald would have had to been around that little girl and possibly Khalil, and even that, because what makes me question in this is if Gerald himself was driving around with say Khalil, or not, if Gerald himself was driving around and having Andrea besides him in the bed or in the car himself, right? But not only that, if Relisha was allowed to go as well. Because see, if Andrea is involved with Khalil, that's to say almost like Andrea was playing a second motherly figure to Relisha. Just enough to be close to that child, just to sometimes take Relisha out by the hand when, say, Khalil wasn't around and he possibly allowed her to. And possibly if she wanted to get, if Relisha was with Andrea at times and Andrea played a motherly figure to Relisha at times, that is to say, let me see, that sometimes Andrea possibly could have been around Gerald as well with the child. That all depends. As in getting in the car, going places, going to the mall places, going to the store places. Where all was this child allowed to go outside of being in Khalil's possession? Relisha. Was a child allowed to go off places with Andrea Tatum, Khalil's wife or ex-wife or whatever? See, that has to be questioned as well. Where all was this little girl allowed to go when she was with Andrea? That has to be questioned. Because if she was allowed to go places with Andrea outside of Khalil being there, it's to say Gerald himself had to be there as well. As in being picked up or something and going, let's go to the mall. Let's all three of us go to the mall. Or all four if we got somebody else in the car. Let's go here, let's go there. Because I'm thinking to be 8 years old or even years before and a woman be married to a man, she's going to in fact play like a stepmother figure to a Relisha. And not only that, you have to question on top of that, how did Andrea Tatum feel about Relisha, the child herself? I'm wondering how did Andrea, that sort of information would in fact have to come from Andrea Tatum's mother. If that woman is still alive, either her mother or father would know that sort of information. Or how did Andrea Tatum feel about Relisha? Knowing that Relisha, if that was Khalil's daughter, yes, Relisha, if that was Khalil's daughter, knowing that Shamika would have given birth around the time where even Andrea and Khalil was still married. How did Andrea feel about that little girl? Because see, that's a point in recognition. That's a point in recognition, because if she didn't feel so good about that little girl Relisha, Andrea herself, if she didn't feel so good all about Relisha, knowing that her husband possibly went off and got another woman pregnant while they were married, it's to say even Andrea herself could have sold the child out into sex trafficking. Does that or does that not make sense? Andrea herself, if she didn't like the fact that she possibly could have been cheated on, you never know what Andrea herself might have done with that child before she died, and that could be the reason of why she died. You never know. This is all good questioning. Gerald knows something. He has to. Gerald, in fact, has to know something. I think I'm going to make a shorter video about that, what I just stated. Or maybe not. Maybe not. Maybe I should, though. Make a video. How did Andrea, when Relisha Rudd came up missing, how did Andrea, if say that was the child's father, Khalil himself, how did Andrea feel about that sort of thing? Knowing that her grown man husband might have went off and cheated off cheated on her with some crackhead, full-blown crackhead, Shamika, cheated on Andrea with Shamika, and then brought a baby into this world, and then once the baby was into the world, was that sort of thing found out by Andrea, if it's the truth, and how would she have felt about that? I'm going to make a video. I think that's all to be said about now, because I want to save some so I can ask that question in the next video. So yes, let me know. I'll be back.